Nobody noticed the quiet woman in row 7. She ordered water, read her book, and seemed totally ordinary. But when the plane's engine caught fire and they started falling from the sky, the pilot whispered 2 words that changed everything: Echo 9, the call sign of a legendary military hero. Before watching full story, comment below from where are you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The morning sun shone through the windows of Denver International Airport as passengers waited to board Flight 447 to Miami. Among them sat Sarah Martinez, a woman in her mid-30s who looked completely ordinary. She wore simple blue jeans, a gray sweater, and old sneakers. Her dark hair was pulled back in a basic ponytail, and she carried a small backpack and a paperback book. Nothing about her suggested she was anyone special or important. Sarah sat quietly in the waiting area, reading her book while other passengers talked loudly around her. Business people discussed their deals, families planned their vacations, and college students shared stories about spring break. But nobody paid any attention to Sarah. She was just another face in the crowd, invisible and unremarkable. When boarding began, Sarah waited patiently in line with her economy class ticket. The gate agent barely looked at her as she scanned Sarah's boarding pass. "Have a nice flight," the agent said automatically, already focused on the next passenger. Sarah walked down the jet bridge and found her assigned seat in row 7, window seat C. The aircraft was a Boeing 737, clean and modern but nothing fancy. Sarah settled into her seat and pulled out her book again. The middle seat next to her remained empty, but an elderly man named Frank took the aisle seat. He smiled at Sarah as he sat down, the kind of polite greeting strangers share on airplanes. "Going to Miami for business or pleasure?" Frank asked, trying to be friendly. "Visiting family," Sarah replied quietly. "That's nice. I'm going to see my grandchildren," Frank said. "What kind of work do you do?" Sarah paused for just a moment before answering. "I work for the government. Nothing too exciting." Frank nodded and opened his magazine, satisfied with the small talk. As more passengers boarded, Sarah watched them carefully, though she tried not to make it obvious. This was an old habit from her military training: always be aware of your surroundings and the people around you. She noticed the young mother struggling with 2 small children in row 5, the businessman in row 3 who kept checking his phone, and the college students in the back who were already too loud. Flight attendant Jennifer walked through the cabin, checking that carry-on bags were properly stored. She was friendly but professional, greeting passengers with practiced smiles. When she reached Sarah's row, she glanced at Sarah for less than a second. "Everything okay here?" Jennifer asked, but she was already looking past Sarah to the next row. Sarah was just another passenger to process, nothing memorable or important. In the cockpit, Captain James Wright completed his pre-flight checks with co-pilot Mike Torres. James was 52 years old with silver hair and steady hands that came from 25 years of flying experience. He had started in the Air Force, flying cargo planes around the world, before joining the airlines after his military service ended. "Weather looks good all the way to Miami," Mike reported, studying the flight plan on his tablet. "Should be a smooth trip." "Perfect," James replied. "I always prefer boring flights. Less paperwork that way." Both pilots laughed as they continued their preparations. James reviewed the passenger manifest on his computer screen, scanning the list of names as required by company policy. 147 passengers and 6 crew members. Nothing unusual jumped out at him, just typical names of people traveling for business, vacation, or family visits. The name Sarah Martinez appeared on the list, assigned to seat 7C, but it meant nothing to him. The flight attendants completed their safety demonstration as the aircraft pushed back from the gate. Sarah watched the presentation even though she had memorized every word years ago. She knew exactly where all the emergency exits were located, how the oxygen masks worked, and what to do if they had to evacuate the plane. But she kept this knowledge to herself, just like she kept everything else about her real identity secret. As Flight 447 took off from Denver and climbed toward its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet, Sarah stared out her window at the mountains below. She had flown over these same mountains many times before, but in very different circumstances. Those flights had been in military aircraft, heading to places she could never talk about, on missions that officially never happened. During the climb, the flight attendants began their beverage service. Jennifer pushed the cart slowly down the aisle, offering drinks and snacks to passengers. When she reached row 7, she looked at Sarah with the same polite but distant expression she used for everyone. "Something to drink?" Jennifer asked, already reaching for plastic cups. "Just water, please," Sarah replied. Jennifer handed her a small bottle of water without making eye contact, her attention already moving to Frank. "And for you, sir?" Sarah might as well have been invisible. After the beverage service, most passengers settled in for the long flight. Some read books, others watched movies on their tablets, and many simply took naps. Sarah continued reading her paperback novel, but part of her mind stayed alert, listening to the sounds of the aircraft. The steady hum of the engines, the whoosh of air conditioning, the occasional bump of turbulence, all normal sounds that most passengers never noticed. Frank tried to make conversation again. "That's an interesting book," he said, glancing at the cover. "I read mostly mysteries myself." "It's good," Sarah replied politely. "Do you read much when you travel?" Frank asked. "Sometimes," Sarah said, not wanting to encourage a long conversation. Frank took the hint and returned to his magazine. 2 hours into the flight, everything changed in an instant. The aircraft suddenly shuddered violently, far worse than any normal turbulence. Passengers looked around nervously as their drinks spilled and overhead bins rattled. The seatbelt sign came on with a sharp electronic chime, and Captain Wright's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing some mechanical issues and need everyone to return to their seats immediately and fasten their seatbelts. Flight attendants, please prepare for possible emergency procedures." But Sarah knew this was much worse than mechanical issues. Through her window she could see black smoke pouring from the left engine. The engine was on fire, and she could tell from the aircraft's behavior that they were losing power and control. Her military training kicked in automatically, and she began evaluating their situation with the cold precision of a combat pilot. The aircraft tilted dangerously to the left as alarms began sounding in the cockpit. Sarah could hear them even from her seat in the cabin. She recognized those sounds: engine failure warnings, hydraulic system alerts, and fire detection alarms. This was exactly the kind of emergency that killed people when handled incorrectly. In the cockpit, red warning lights flashed across the instrument panel like angry Christmas decorations. "Engine number 2 is showing critical failure." Mike shouted over the noise of alarms. "Fire warning light is on." James immediately began emergency procedures, his hands moving quickly across switches and controls. "Shut down engine 2 and activate the fire suppression system," he ordered. Mike followed the emergency checklist, but more problems appeared immediately. "Captain, we're losing hydraulic pressure in 2 systems. Flight controls are becoming unresponsive." The aircraft continued tilting left despite James's efforts to level it. "I can barely hold her steady," James said through gritted teeth. James grabbed the radio microphone with one hand while fighting the controls with the other. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is United Flight 447 declaring an emergency. We have engine failure with fire, hydraulic system failures, and loss of flight control authority. Request immediate vectors to the nearest suitable airport." Air traffic control responded quickly through crackling radio static. "United Flight 447, we copy your mayday. Denver International is approximately 200 miles behind your current position. Kansas City International is 150 miles ahead on your current course. Which airport do you prefer?" "Kansas City," James replied immediately. "We may not have enough control authority to turn around." "Roger, Flight 447. Kansas City approach control is being notified. Emergency equipment is being dispatched. Descend to flight level 240 and proceed direct to Kansas City." Back in the cabin, passengers were beginning to panic as the aircraft continued shaking and tilting unnaturally. Oxygen masks suddenly dropped from the ceiling with a loud pop, swinging back and forth as people grabbed for them. Children started crying, adults shouted questions, and the flight attendants struggled to maintain order while putting on their own oxygen masks. Sarah remained completely calm. While everyone else panicked around her, she quickly put on her oxygen mask and then studied the aircraft's behavior with professional detachment. The way it rolled to the left, the unusual engine sounds, the smell of smoke beginning to enter the cabin, she knew exactly what was happening and how serious their situation had become. Without hesitation, Sarah unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, moving toward the front of the aircraft. This violated every safety rule, but she knew they needed help that only she could provide. Frank grabbed her arm. "Where are you going?" "You need to stay in your seat," he said through his oxygen mask. "I'll be right back," Sarah told him calmly, gently removing his hand from her arm. She walked up the aisle against the flow of flight attendants who were rushing to help passengers with their oxygen masks. Jennifer saw her coming and immediately tried to stop her. "Ma'am, you absolutely must return to your seat right now." Jennifer said firmly, blocking Sarah's path. "The captain has ordered everyone to remain seated." "I need to speak with the captain," Sarah replied, her voice carrying an authority that hadn't been there before. "That's completely impossible during an emergency. Please sit down." Sarah looked directly into Jennifer's eyes, and her entire demeanor changed. The quiet, invisible passenger from row 7 was gone, replaced by someone with unmistakable command presence. "Listen to me very carefully," Sarah said in a voice that expected to be obeyed. "I am a military pilot with combat experience. I can help save this aircraft and everyone on it." Jennifer stared at Sarah, suddenly seeing something completely different in her eyes. This wasn't the same person who had quietly asked for water 2 hours earlier. There was confidence, authority, and absolute certainty in Sarah's voice that made Jennifer step aside without thinking. "I need you to tell the captain that there's a qualified military pilot who can assist," Sarah continued. "Tell him it's urgent." Jennifer nodded and hurried toward the cockpit, while Sarah waited calmly in the galley area. Other passengers stared at her in confusion, wondering who this woman really was. In the cockpit, the situation was getting worse by the minute. The aircraft was becoming increasingly difficult to control as hydraulic pressure continued dropping. "We're losing it, James," Mike said desperately. "I don't think we can make it to Kansas City." "We have to," James replied, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool cockpit air. "There's no other choice." Jennifer's voice came through the cockpit intercom. "Captain Wright, there's a passenger who says she's a military pilot. She wants to help." James almost ignored the message. Civilians always thought they could help in emergencies, and it usually just made things worse. But something in Jennifer's tone made him reconsider. "Tell her to go back to her seat," James said initially. But then Mike looked at him with desperate eyes. "James, we're not going to make it with just the two of us. Maybe we should listen to her." James thought for exactly 3 seconds before making his decision. "Bring her up." The cockpit door opened and Sarah stepped inside. Immediately, her presence changed the entire atmosphere. She quickly scanned the instrument panel, reading the situation faster than most pilots could process the information. Her eyes moved from gauge to gauge, taking in engine parameters, hydraulic pressures, electrical systems, and flight control positions. "What's your current status?" Sarah asked with calm professionalism. "Engine 2 failed with fire, now shut down," James replied. "Lost 2 hydraulic systems, partial flight control, can barely maintain level flight." Sarah nodded, processing this information against her extensive emergency training. "You still have manual reversion capability through mechanical linkages," Sarah observed, studying the control positions. "Your elevator authority is reduced but functional. The asymmetric thrust from the single engine is causing your roll tendency." James stared at her in amazement. This level of system knowledge was far beyond what any casual pilot would possess. "Who exactly are you?" James demanded, his hands still fighting the controls. "Someone who can help," Sarah replied calmly. "What's your military background, Captain?" "Air Force cargo pilot, 25 years total experience," James answered. "Then you understand emergency procedures, but this situation requires combat-level flying skills," Sarah stated matter-of-factly. Sarah moved to the jump seat behind the pilots and strapped herself in with practiced efficiency. "Reduce power on your remaining engine to 65%, she instructed. "You're creating too much asymmetric thrust, which is fighting your control inputs." James hesitated for a moment, then followed her guidance. Immediately, the aircraft became noticeably more stable. "Better?" Sarah asked. "Much better," James admitted, his respect for this mysterious passenger growing rapidly. "Now I need you to trust me completely. Can you do that?" James studied Sarah's face, seeing something familiar but unable to place it. "I need to know who you are before I turn my aircraft over to a stranger." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, knowing that what she said next would change everything. "My name is Sarah Martinez. I'm currently on military leave from active duty." "What do you fly?" James asked. "A-10 Thunderbolt II. Close air support missions." "Combat experience?" 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq, multiple classified operations." James was impressed but still cautious. Then Sarah added the information that would transform the entire situation. "I was also part of a special operations unit. We handled missions that regular military pilots couldn't accomplish." She paused, looking directly at James. "Have you ever heard the call sign Echo 9? James froze completely. His hands stopped moving on the controls and his face went pale with recognition. Mike noticed the sudden change. "What's wrong?" he asked. James turned slowly to stare at Sarah, understanding finally dawning in his eyes. Echo 9, James whispered, his voice filled with awe and disbelief. You've heard of it, Sarah confirmed quietly. Every military pilot in the world has heard of Echo 9, James replied, his voice trembling with respect. The pilot who saved that convoy in Fallujah when they were surrounded by insurgents. That was a long time ago, Sarah said modestly, but James continued. Single-handedly held off enemy forces for over 3 hours until rescue units could arrive. Flew multiple attack runs with a damaged aircraft and limited ammunition. He paused, remembering more stories. And the extraction mission in Afghanistan when that transport crashed in Taliban territory. Sarah remained silent as James recounted her legendary exploits. Echo 9 flew into a hot landing zone under heavy enemy fire and extracted 23 wounded soldiers. Made 3 trips back into the combat zone because the helicopter couldn't carry everyone at once. Mike listened in amazement as James continued. The classified missions in Syria, Somalia, and places that don't officially exist on any map, James added. They say Echo 9 could fly anything with wings, anywhere in the world, under any conditions imaginable. He shook his head in disbelief. But the official report said Echo 9 was killed in action 2 years ago. Sometimes it's better for certain people to stay officially dead, Sarah replied cryptically. I needed time away from that life. James made his decision immediately. Mike, switch seats with Echo 9. Let her take the controls. Are you serious? Mike asked incredulously. This is the most decorated combat pilot in Air Force history, James explained. If anyone can save this aircraft and everyone on board, it's her. Sarah moved to the co-pilot seat, and the moment her hands touched the flight controls, everything changed dramatically. The aircraft, which had been fighting them constantly, suddenly responded with precision and stability. She made small, expert adjustments that brought the plane under complete control. Your hydraulic failure isn't total, Sarah explained while working the controls. You still have manual control authority through cable linkages and mechanical systems. But it requires a completely different flying technique than what you learned in civilian training. Her hands moved across the controls with the confidence that came from years of flying damaged aircraft in combat zones. I need you to contact Kansas City Approach Control, Sarah told James. Tell them we have a qualified military pilot assisting and request their longest runway with full emergency equipment standing by. James immediately picked up the radio microphone. Kansas City Approach, United Flight 447. We now have a qualified military pilot assisting with aircraft control. Requesting runway 01 left, your longest available runway with full emergency equipment deployment. United 447, runway 01 left is 10,800 feet long. Emergency equipment is already rolling. What are your current intentions? We'll need a straight-in approach, Sarah interrupted, taking the microphone from James. This is the military pilot assisting Flight 447. We have partial flight control authority and will require precision approach guidance. Please clear all other traffic from the area. The air traffic controller's voice immediately became more respectful when he heard Sarah's confident, professional tone. Roger, military pilot. All traffic is being diverted. You have priority handling. Kansas City weather is wind calm, visibility 10 miles, clear skies. Copy all, Kansas City. Flight 447 beginning descent for approach, Sarah replied, already configuring the aircraft for landing. In the passenger cabin, people had noticed that the aircraft was flying much more smoothly than before. The violent shaking and rolling had stopped, replaced by steady, controlled flight. Jennifer and Robert, the flight attendants, were helping passengers understand the emergency procedures while trying to keep everyone calm. Is it just me or does the plane feel much better now? Robert asked Jennifer quietly. That woman from row 7, Jennifer replied, remembering Sarah's transformation from invisible passenger to military commander. She's up in the cockpit helping the pilots. The quiet one? What could she possibly do to help? Robert asked skeptically. I don't think she was as ordinary as we all thought, Jennifer said, recalling the authority and confidence she had seen in Sarah's eyes. There was something very different about her when the emergency started. Neither flight attendant could have imagined that their forgettable passenger was one of the most famous military pilots in the world. Sarah began the approach to Kansas City International Airport, knowing that landing an aircraft with partial hydraulic failure required skills that very few pilots possessed. The approach had to be flown manually without the assistance of automated systems, requiring constant adjustments to maintain proper speed and glide path. James, I need you to help me with rudder inputs during the approach, Sarah explained. The aircraft will want to roll left because of the asymmetric thrust from our single engine. When I call for rudder, apply firm right pressure. Understood, James replied, his respect for Sarah's expertise growing with every passing minute. Mike, I need you to configure the aircraft exactly as I specify, Sarah continued. When I call for flaps, give me exactly 15 degrees, not 10 or 20. When I call for landing gear, wait for my precise timing. Everything has to be perfect because we only get one chance at this. The approach was steeper and faster than normal, but Sarah maintained perfect control throughout the descent. Air traffic control provided continuous updates on their position and altitude, while emergency vehicles took positions along the runway. Fire trucks, ambulances, and rescue equipment waited for their arrival. Flight 447, you're looking good on approach. Emergency equipment is standing by, the controller reported. Copy, Kansas City. We're committed to landing, Sarah replied calmly. She had made much more difficult landings in combat zones, but never with 147 civilian lives depending on her skills. As they crossed the runway threshold, Sarah made final control adjustments with the precision that had made Echo 9 legendary throughout the military aviation community. The touchdown was firm but smooth, exactly on the centerline of the runway. She immediately applied maximum braking and deployed the thrust reversers on their remaining engine. Outstanding landing, Flight 447. Emergency equipment is following you down the runway, the controller announced with obvious relief in his voice. The aircraft rolled out smoothly and came to a complete stop about halfway down the long runway, surrounded immediately by emergency vehicles with flashing lights. Kansas City ground, Flight 447 is safely on the runway. Emergency is terminated. Request ground transportation to the terminal for passenger deplaning, Sarah announced over the radio. The cockpit fell silent except for the sound of their single engine winding down and emergency vehicles positioning around the aircraft. Echo 9, that was the most incredible piece of flying I have ever witnessed in 25 years, James said with profound respect and gratitude. How did you maintain such precise control with so many system failures? Mike asked, still amazed by what he had just experienced. Training and experience, Sarah replied simply. When you've flown damaged aircraft in combat zones where people are shooting at you, civilian emergencies become manageable challenges. She began shutting down systems with the same calm efficiency she had shown throughout the entire emergency. The evacuation proceeded smoothly using normal passenger stairs rather than emergency slides. All 147 passengers and 6 crew members walked off the aircraft safely, many unaware of how close they had come to disaster. News crews arrived quickly to cover the dramatic emergency landing, setting up cameras and interviewing passengers about their experience. Sarah sat quietly in a corner of the terminal, once again invisible among the crowd of passengers. Reporters interviewed other travelers about the frightening experience and praised the flight crew for their professionalism during the emergency. None of them mentioned the woman from row 7 who had actually saved all their lives. Frank, the elderly passenger who had been sitting next to Sarah, was interviewed by a local news crew. The pilots did an amazing job, he told the reporter. I never felt like we were in real danger because they kept everything under control. He had no idea that the quiet woman reading a book beside him was the person responsible for their survival. Captain James Wright approached Sarah's quiet corner where she sat reading her paperback novel again, looking exactly like the ordinary passenger she had pretended to be at the beginning of the flight. The airline executives want to interview you, he said. The media wants to know about the military pilot who helped save Flight 447. No interviews, Sarah replied firmly without looking up from her book. No media coverage. But you're a genuine hero, James insisted. People should know what you did for them. Echo 9 works better as a legend, Sarah explained patiently. Let people think it was just excellent crew resource management and good training. James sat down in the chair next to her, still trying to understand this remarkable woman. Why were you really on that flight? Military leave doesn't explain traveling under a civilian passport with no identification of your real background or capabilities. Sarah closed her book and looked at James thoughtfully. Some missions change you in ways that are hard to explain. I needed time away from being Echo 9 to remember who Sarah Martinez used to be. And did you remember? James asked gently. I remembered that saving people is what I do best, Sarah replied with a slight smile. Whether it's soldiers in a combat zone or passengers on a commercial flight, the mission is always the same. She stood up to leave, extending her hand to James. Captain Wright, it was an honor flying with you today. "The honor was entirely mine, Echo 9, James replied, shaking her hand with the deep respect due to a fellow military veteran. "Will you go back to active duty?" "Maybe someday," Sarah said. "Right now, I just want to visit my sister in Miami and think about what comes next in my life." As Sarah walked toward her gate to catch a connecting flight to Miami, James watched her disappear back into the crowd of ordinary travelers. Within minutes, she became invisible again, just another passenger among hundreds of others in the busy terminal. None of the people around her would ever know that they had just passed one of the most decorated military pilots in American history. The news reports that evening focused on the skill of the flight crew and the successful emergency landing, but they never mentioned Echo 9. Sarah Martinez was exactly where she wanted to be, hidden in plain sight, ready to help when needed but content to be ordinary when the crisis passed. Her carry-on bag contained civilian clothes, a few books, and some souvenirs for her sister's children. There were no medals, no certificates, and no evidence of her military career. The legend of Echo 9 would continue to inspire military aviators around the world, while Sarah Martinez simply wanted to be a loving aunt visiting family in Florida. Sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who choose to remain anonymous, carrying their extraordinary capabilities quietly while living ordinary lives. They walk among us every day, invisible until the moment when their unique skills become the difference between life and death for people who never see them coming.